So we're going to invite the next group, which is Kathrine Rehner, John Ippolito, Mohammed Dahir, Gabriel Forget, Ivan Lassan, and Carmela Matina, and I hope I've pronounced all of your names correctly. They're going to be speaking, their title is Adult Migrants, Informal Language Learning Experiences, Collecting Data While in Pandemic Lockdown. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So this presentation reports on the preliminary stages of a multi-year, multi-site comparative study of the formal and informal language learning experiences of adult migrants. In particular, migrants' priorities for their language learning, their agency in choosing language learning opportunities, and how language learning serves their needs. We should note that we're using the term migrant as a broad descriptor for anyone who has moved across a border. However, we also acknowledge that the term will be read differently in different contexts, especially against the backdrop of what has been called the battle over the words used to describe migrants. The aim of the study is to provide evidence-based pedagogical and policy recommendations for how language learning opportunities can better enable the social integration of adult migrants into a host country. Our research team is currently in the data collection phase of the project. So what we can share with you today are preliminary methodological insights along with a few initial findings. So we'll begin today with a broad rationale for the study, followed by a review of our theoretical frameworks and a synopsis of study methods in a time of social distancing. And we'll then share firsthand experiences with data collection in Canada, the United States, and Italy. And finally, we'll present several select preliminary findings. So the rationale for the study is rooted in the intensity of contemporary global migration, where unprecedented numbers of adult migrants are forced into linguistically alien terrains and are often isolated and disadvantaged by language barriers, preventing full participation in host societies. The study is carrying out a comparative analysis of adult migrants in the following 3 transit or destination sites, characterized by an influx of newcomers: the Greater Toronto Area in Canada, Erie, Pennsylvania in the United States, and Agrigento, Sicily in Italy. The study's privileging of migrant perspectives is rooted in a gap identified by the International Organization for Migration, whereby while some policymakers have access to a wider range of information and data than ever before, it is apparent that there still exists a level of presumption and a lack of knowledge about potential and actual migrant decision-making and experiences, end quote. The report calls for a migrant-centric approach, what has also been termed an anthropocentric perspective.
Conceptually, the study is shaped by a hybrid theoretical framework linking transnationalism and translanguaging. The first part of this framework, transnationalism, challenges long-held narratives that portray immigration as a unidirectional and permanent move from a country of origin to a country of residence, what one might call a voyage of no return. Transnationalism acknowledges networks of interconnection with a country of origin, what has also been called transnational connectivity, whether taking shape as video calls or money transfers or airline flights. A transnational approach thus acknowledges enhanced means for interaction between a country of origin and a country of residence, and may also include various points on migratory journeys with multiple directions. For many migrants, relocation or displacement entails living in a society where the dominant language is other than the language in their country of origin. Learning a dominant language of the host society has often signaled fuller participation, whether understood as social inclusion or social integration. Now, while it is difficult to argue that settlement in a host country is not well served by proficiency in a dominant language, the relationship between dominant and minority languages requires especially careful attention when these languages are lived concurrently in linguistically diverse social space. For this purpose, we have turned to translanguaging, an approach for understanding language learning from a migrant-centric vantage. Translanguaging acknowledges that migrants often live in more than one language and often draw on their full linguistic repertoires without recourse to externally defined distinctions. Simply put, they communicate with what they have. Our overall methodological goal then is to enable multi-directional analyses of migration via transnationalism and fluid analyses of first-person experiences of language use via translanguaging.
Methodologically, the study draws on 102 surveys and interviews with 3 participant pools selected purposefully to represent a range of diverse perspectives from migrants, service providers, and academics in Canada, the United States, and Italy. The data emerges from 25 surveys and 5 follow-up interviews with adult migrant language learners at each of the 3 research sites and is further triangulated with a smaller subset of surveys with adult education providers and academics in migration-related fields. Our initial plan was to be on the ground in each of the 3 research sites. However, since we haven't been able to travel, we have had to rely on our contacts in the 3 regions to recruit through informal invitations and personal networks. In Toronto and Erie, this has resulted in participants enrolled in adult English language classes that have moved online during the pandemic. And in Agrigento, this has resulted in participants known to our research assistant, a freelance educational researcher familiar with services for this demographic. We have opted for an approach whereby a research assistant opens our survey platform, SurveyMonkey, and then shares the screen with the respondent via a Zoom screen. Once the informed consent protocol has been reviewed, the research assistant then reviews each question with the respondent and enters the respondent's answers. As for the interviews, once again, these are taking place via Zoom. Thus far, for the surveys with migrant language learners, we have completed 25 in Toronto, 25 in Agrigento, and thus far only 6 in Erie. Surveys with migrant language learners in Erie, as well as surveys with service providers and academics, are just getting underway. Follow-up interviews with the language learners are still underway. The surveys and interview protocols are in English in Canada and the United States, and in Italian in Sicily. Thus far, we have not required on-site translators since our migrant language learners have a level of proficiency in English or Italian that allows them to carry on a conversation. This proficiency level among the respondents in North America may reflect the fact that the language teachers who have helped us recruit potential participants are drawing on their own personal networks or classes, which include adults with more than a rudimentary level of English proficiency. As for the Italian site, here, once again, we are drawing on the personal networks of our research assistant, who's a freelance researcher familiar with migrants who have spent enough time in Italy to gain some proficiency in Italian. At this early stage, we are only in a position to provide a glimpse into the migrant survey data. And since the collection of migrant survey data from Erie is still in progress, we have chosen to combine the complemented survey data with the completed survey data from Toronto and refer to it collectively as the North American migrant data. Before we get to this preliminary data, however, we're going to hear about firsthand experiences of data collection from 2 of our research assistants.
My experience as a research assistant collecting data in Canada and the United States has been interesting and positive. Conducting surveys and interviews from a distance has meant collecting data via Zoom, which comes with challenges. At times, the participants freeze on the screen or the Zoom calls lag or skip due to internet connection issues. Participants use various devices, and looking at a screen for about an hour or more, especially a cell phone, can be quite tiring. Some participants were less comfortable communicating in English, so rewording questions and looking at the teachers for support has been very helpful. Participants sometimes forget we had scheduled a survey or interview, and there can be inconsistent attendance of the participants in the English class in Erie. In fact, participants in the United States did not initially respond to our call for participants because the technological aspect of our study was intimidating and they were cautious of scams. It was only when their teachers invited us into the safe and comfortable environment of their online English class to conduct surveys that the students felt comfortable enough to participate. I've met many interesting participants, and I'm so grateful to have the chance to talk to them and hear their stories. During a survey, one participant told me about his difficult travels through many countries, including 3 years in jail on his journey to North America. During an interview, when I asked a participant a question, she answered it and then asked me to answer it as well, which caught me off guard and made us all laugh. Yet another participant wanted to ask me a few questions about my languages and my studies before we started the survey, since I was going to ask so much about him. The teachers I've worked with have been instrumental in our data collection. They've helped us find participants, and they help participants feel comfortable with their presence, support, clarification, and even translation. I look forward to continuing the data collection in the United States and to learning more about what we found.
Sure.
Sono molto felice di poter condividere con voi la mia esperienza di raccolta dati in Agrigento. Per il reclutamento dei partecipanti al sondaggio mi sono servita della mia rete personale di conoscenza e del passaparola. A causa della pandemia, per sopperire alla mancanza del rapporto face to face, è stato molto utile creare un rapporto di fiducia con i partecipanti prima della somministrazione del sondaggio, questo per creare quel feedback necessario alla ricerca. E in effetti poi nel momento della condivisione dello schermo i partecipanti si sono sentiti molto a loro agio e addirittura hanno continuato a parlare anche dopo aver chiuso il sondaggio. La sfida più grande è stata proprio questa: superare la difficoltà del Covid, perché la pandemia ci ha costretti a usare la tecnologia, a trasferire le relazioni sulle piattaforme web. Io ho usato sia Google Meet che Zoom, quindi è stato molto importante creare una relazione, un ambiente tranquillo, in modo tale che potessi spiegare bene la modalità di partecipazione al sondaggio. Questo perché ha favorito anche un ambiente sereno e disteso per superare tutti quei momenti di difficoltà tecnologica, come ad esempio quando non si apriva l'audio o cadeva la linea. Tutti i partecipanti hanno lasciato una significativa